Charlton Heston used to say that the Second Amendment was the most important amendment in the Bill of Rights because the Second Amendment provides for the first and frankly all of the other ones. David Lombardo from SaferUSA.net is our next speaker, and the reason I want to carry a weapon is because David Lombardo is too heavy.
Well, that's a good way to start off, isn't it? I don't know. Actually, I do want to start off with something. Finally, after 2 years of trying, I have a radio show. WIND Radio now is a gun talk show. We're the only gun talk show that I'm aware of anywhere in this region. I mean, there may be a smaller station that has one I don't know about, but WIND is the big conservative talk radio show. And well, if I'd have known you were going to take a picture, I'd have waved. So I'm real happy with that. Sunday nights, 9 o'clock. Tune us in, AM 560. I'm sorry, Dan, but what can I say? Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Who 200 plus years ago would have thought that that single sentence would be such a controversial thing? I find it interesting that in the Bill of Rights there are 10 amendments to the Constitution, 9 of which belong to us and 1 of which apparently seems to belong to the federal government. I can't resolve that in my head. I have a hard time with that. It's probably why I'm not a liberal. A little background on the Second Amendment. It's actually very interesting. Our Second Amendment goes all the way back to the 17th century. It goes back to England. And it's the English Bill of Rights, actually. And if you, who said they hated history? I can't remember. Somebody said they hated history. It's interesting because back in the 17th century, the English were Catholic. And Protestantism was moving into England. And do you know what the English did? They forbade Protestants to own weapons. 17th century. I don't think they had assault rifles back then, but that was what they did. And so, as those of you who do know history are probably aware, that King James II was overthrown by William II, or the Third, I don't remember, I get those numbers mixed up, and Mary II, and I don't know, they still had their heads, whoever those people were. But it is interesting because when General Gage, who was the commander of British troops in North America, just prior to the Revolutionary War. In fact, one of the things that set it off, what Gage did, you remember the shot heard around the world? Lexington and Concord? A lot of people don't understand what was so relevant about that. Why was that such a big deal? It was a big deal because that's where the colonials kept their weaponry. All their weapons and their ammunition were kept in Concord, and Gage had dispatched the troops to disarm Bostonians. He was going to take over the country, take over the insurrection, take over those terrible people who didn't like their native land. And so what is the very first thing that Gage did? He tried to disarm the colonials. And we see how that worked out. That was the first shot of the Revolutionary War. When they created the Constitution, and I am by no stretch a constitutional scholar, but when they created the Constitution, we had Federalists and Anti-Federalists. There were those who believed strongly in states' rights because they were very hinky about a strong federal government after having come from England. And there were those who didn't like the English way, but they felt they needed a strong centralized government to bring everything together. And what literally happened was, neither side, in their wildest imagination, would have ever thought that a government would try and disarm its populace. Neither side, not the Federalists, not the Anti-Federalists, ever considered that you would take guns away from the civilians. In fact, they were the front line to protect the country. But there was a belief by the Federalists that they wanted a standing army. They felt that our country needed to have a standing army and a navy. The anti-federalists, who were a little more weary of the motherland, really did not like that concept. They wanted state armies. Every state was going to have its own army, and if there was a national crisis, then the federal government would have had the right to put together an army to meet the crisis from outside the country. Well, they talked about that. They used a lot of profanity in those days. If you go back and read it, it's really very colorful. If you think the newspapers are bad today, you should go back and read the things that they said in those days. It was astounding. And they would just make stuff up. They would just say, you know, he's an adulterer. I mean, they wouldn't even know. They would just make, oh, wait, is that now or? I don't know. I'm sorry. I get confused. I slide. So what they literally did to make this work, the Second Amendment, what they literally did is the Federalists came up with this wording to appease the Anti-Federalists. And that wording is, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Do you see how that part of that sentence is saying to states' rightists, okay, we get it, you want to have your own militia, you want to have a state army, all right? But then to assure them that there would always be a watchdog over the government, both federal and local. They then put a comma, the infamous comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. They're literally saying the states have a right to have their own militia, but you can never take guns away from the population because they are the final arbiter of whether or not the government is working for them or against them. In 2010, an armed security guard in Washington, D.C. was not allowed to keep his weapon in his own home. That was hell. Is time? I'm out of time? Any questions? Okay, I'll just...
What about Heller?
I'm sorry?
Yes, please tell us what the rest of your speech is.
You just wasted 20 seconds.
Will I get spanked? It scares me. Can I just have 1 minute? Holy Christ. Okay, the murder rate per 100,000 in 1957 was 10, but now the murder rate in 2007 was 9. So here's the interesting thing. The murder rate in Chicago is 16 per 100,000. 16 per 100,000. Almost double what it is across the country. The aggravated assault rate in 1957 was 60. The ag assault rate in 2007 was 300. Here's why it's important. People will tell you you don't need to own a gun because it's safer now than it used to be. The problem is the medics aren't letting you die on the way to the hospital. We are hundreds of times more dangerous in our society today than we were then. If we had 1970s medical technology today, you ready for this? The murder rate would be 4 times what it is. If we had 30s medical technology, it would be 10 times what it is. So I'm almost done. I swear I am almost done. In a state where its citizens are not allowed to carry firearms for personal protection, in the only state where we don't have concealed carry, in the only state where Chicago aldermen tell you it's bad to own a firearm, but they can carry a concealed firearm, in a state, okay, where the mayor of Chicago is redeploying police and the crime rate goes up instead, in a state where gangbangers selling crack on the streets of Chicago in broad daylight are killing one another, and if you happen to be driving by, you get shot in the process, in a state, all right, where to balance budgets, we're laying off law enforcement people as the crime rate goes up, in a state where our license plates are made by the governor, for crying out loud. Do we need concealed carry in this state? And I will leave you with this thought. You're darn right we need it. And remember this. Elections have consequences. Don't sit on your butt and let somebody else do the job. Get people out and vote.
Thank you.